the maths is, if it is 28 square meters, and we can corroborate that, there's a bit of research which says that. And so if you multiply that up, that's roughly 350 kilograms of nitrate absorption alone, right? And we know that, nitrates get sold for somewhere between 2 and 4 grand a kilogram. That's just nitrates. So that's whatever it is, 500,000-700,000 pounds for a salt marsh, for a salt marsh, a hectare of salt marshes. And so that's the value, and it's plain to see. But it just needs to be ratified. There's we're like, again, like the venture capitalists, the traders, the city the city fund managers, they like to know that everything is monitored, reported, and verified. If they're going to, again, put their money in it for any length of time, because it's yours or my pension or whatever it happens, whatever money that they're managing. And so in order to be bulletproof, it needs to have the right amount of due diligence on it and research, and that's the scientists.
Hi, Tom. Welcome to the light side of green. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today to talk about your role as founder and CEO of Earth Change. And we will get into that. But before we get started, my first question with my guests is to learn a little bit about your background, so that we can have a little bit of a context to how you arrived at this point. So welcome.
Hi, Anton. Thank you very much for having me. So a little bit about my life. I was educated in the UK, went over to the States, and spent my undergraduate years there in North Chapel Hill in North Carolina. Worked for Procter & Gamble afterwards, actually, and then got into sports marketing, which has sort of taken me all over the world. And I started my own company in 1999, based on grassroots sports marketing, and is figuring out how we could use bands to affect social change. And it's sort of, that's really what excites me. It's purpose and figuring out how, at that stage, it was sport and music and how that could actually help change society.
Right.
And there was women's empowerment programs in the slums of Delhi and Mumbai. We did all sorts of different things. So worked all over the world in sports marketing, and then ended up in the environment through a sort of a fairly tortuous route, but worked in the city, and that was not for me, in between sports marketing and this.
Right.
And came across Land and Water, and the most amazing company. They're environmental engineers, and their chief exec and founder, James McLean, who owns a lot of Earth Change, was looking to finance something. And he said, look, and we were just chatting about how at that stage, BNG, or natural credits, really could increase the margin of his business. And then there was a chance for me to go find purpose again. And instead of social purpose, I find environmental purpose. And so James and I and his partner Richard, one other guy, Mark Liebers, started Earth Change 3 years ago, basically, although it's just recently been incorporated. So that's really what we've done.
Okay, excellent. I just wanted to double click on one of the things you mentioned there. You talked about the social change and in working in sports and with music. Could you just talk a little bit about that, just so we get a bit more context?
Sure. And so lots of people say, sport and music, it's a way of, reducing crime, doing that sort of thing. Well, it's not. But what sport and music does, it basically pulls people with a passion together. And so whether it is netball in the slums of Delhi and Mumbai, whether it is music, MTV, there was a program that, so we pulled kids together in schools to be able to teach them how to create music videos, rather than doing other things. Sport, and so the purpose side of it is, so you pull people together, and then you have a chance to talk to them and say, have you thought, could you do? So not necessarily your coaches, but often sport and music, they provide some consistency in otherwise chaotic lives at the really tough ends of in different parts of society that in some families just doesn't exist. And so so social change is a way of, you have, before you change anybody or anybody's view of the world, you have to win their confidence. And sport and music is a wonderful way of doing that.
And so you founded a business in that area. So how did how does the business work in that area? Some people would maybe naturally have thought an NGO would have been a better
Yeah.
application to.
Well,
So how do you
because
think about that?
yeah. So brands, NGOs do an incredible job, and
Yeah,
so there's
absolutely.
billions and billions of philanthropic and NGO dollars, which do an amazing job. But brands too, at that stage it was called CSR, corporate social responsibility, but it was also
Right.
marketing too. So where the two met, is sort of a social obligation and then experiential marketing was the last, sort of the triangle of the essence really of marketing. So
Right.
we pulled that together, and so our first clients were Nike and Ford, and then Lloyd's TSB, which is a bank, and is figuring out
Hmm.
how they could build their reputation in communities and increase their sales. And so for Ford, for instance, they paid us quite a lot of money to figure out how do we link primary schools with car dealerships, and we did it through tag rugby. And so we organized tag rugby tournaments, and people basically and so the primary schools, they provided minibuses for, they did all sorts of different things as well as the tags, and they became synonymous with community spirit, and this was a brilliant way of getting to their community to market the fact that there's a local dealership, etc., etc. So that was experiential marketing. There was real value, not just to to people's children, which is another way of doing it, and then yeah, so it worked really well. So that is not using, for instance, Nike. We did football camps, and often Nike said, "Oh, we'll teach them to do maths." I was like, "No, no, no, no." Primary school teachers, right? They're brilliant at teaching maths.
Right.
Most primary tools teachers are women aged 30 to 50, and sport is their least favorite subject. So if you can help them with different equipment like tag rugby was, that's a
Hmm.
brilliant way to get their thing. So just understand what the limitations of sport and music are, and don't try and do stuff which is otherwise too difficult to do, because
Right.
kids get it, right? And
Yeah.
the
No,
social
exactly.
compact, that's really what it is. Yeah,
Yeah, and I guess there's an element of authenticity there, right? You want to
exactly,
not force it.
exactly,
You want to be there supporting in the right way. Uh,
exactly.
and I see there's almost a thread into some of the work you're doing now with Earth Change, in that back then there was brands trying to invest in experiential marketing, and now it's more brands trying to invest in circular
Yeah,
economy credits and things like that.
yeah.
Okay.
So there is that. I mean, that is a segue, and there are brands. So there are, there's lots of people looking at. I mean, in carbon in particular, and there are lots of brands who are there's a voluntary carbon code, and so they say, people, Microsoft and various others have done, in terms of setting a bar, Unilever, whatever, who are setting a bar of
Right.
where, how we can restore nature. But probably in the UK, in the area that we are, where land meets water, the most progressive company by country mile is Aviva,
Right.
and they've invested millions and millions of pounds. So 20 million they've just invested in wetlands,
Right.
as a view of, one, because they want to do, or salt marshes actually, because they wanted to do it, because they believe it's the right thing to do, just in terms of their insurance business. So it helps because there is some flood defense benefits of salt marshes. But
Hmm.
but the other part of it is that now the CSR has moved to ESG, which is the
Right.
environmental, social, and governance side of things. And so that's just the right, really the right for a company to conduct business in the right way. Is
Right.
Sarbanes-Oxley sort of governance side of things, and environmental and social speak for themselves. But it's and so brands now are beginning to say, oh, okay, right. So what can we do in the same way? Because there's, as you know, there's a biodiversity and a climate crisis that is here, and everybody feels it's incumbent upon them, to figure out what they can do to help preserve our planet. Because
Yeah.
after all,
Hmm.
the economy, is the client of
Right.
nature. Because what is
Right.
it? 70% of the economy is driven by natural resources.
Hmm.
And so if we don't look after it, we will have no economy.
Right. Exactly. Okay, exciting. So let's now get into Earth change. And you spoke a little bit about the founding story, but maybe you could give us just a bit of an elevator pitch for someone who really isn't familiar with this space. How could they understand what Earth change is and what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah. So the big problem is, or the big goal here is to figure out how nature can pay for her own restoration, right?
Right.
Given that the 70% of the economy is driven by natural resources, then nature should be able to do that if she is priced correctly.
Right.
Um, and so there's trillions and trillions of dollars nature is worth.
Hmm.
And so what Earth Change is seeking to do in conjunction with Land and Water is figure out what is to show how that can be done at scale. Because I mean, we have to be in a rush because the
Hmm.
hockey stick is coming. And so and what we're doing, because we're focused where land meets water, because land and water have been there for the last 40 years,
Hmm.
is figuring out how do you create enhanced biodiverse areas where land meets water. And where land meets water is the plants there are incredibly good at absorbing carbon,
Hmm.
absorbing nutrients. I mean, just today in the UK, there has been pictures of green pictures of Lake Windermere, and Lake Windermere, is pretty iconic for us here in the UK. It's gone green.
Right.
It went green because, and that's algal bloom. And
Right.
algal bloom is basically caused by nitrates and phosphorus, basically fertilizers and some
Right.
effluent that does that. And so it's like, how do we stop that? And nature can stop it herself. And that's the thing.
Right.
And nature can be paid for herself to absorb that by by different people, by developers, by water companies, by different people, right? And so you're talking now, in terms of salt marshes, for instance, and wetlands, and where you're talking, these a hectare of these places can be worth between $500,000 and $1 million. In terms of their natural use, so the absorption of different things, stack benefits, so carbon, but nitrates and phosphates. So they're doing a huge amount of work for this, and people have heard
Right.
of mangroves, and that's which are a lot more who are incredible again at nitrates. But these are the plants. This is the real powerhouse, I suppose, of nature, and where the toughest conditions to survive. And these are the guys that can help clean up the mess that
Right.
we have made, basically. So that's what we're doing.
Yep.
So it's figuring out how do we provide evidence around and how do we provide research for codes to be made, so salt marsh carbon codes and wetland carbon and nutrient codes to correctly price nature,
Hmm.
right? To her job. And so she can not only can be restored, but she can, the key thing this, again, where land meets water, and you've got global warming and sea level rise and everything else, like that has to be maintained as well. So that's basically what we do.
No, thank you. So I'm going to ask a potentially interesting or bizarre question, but it'd be interesting to see how you react to that. Um, so, so you mentioned about finding out and trying to establish the worth of nature,
Yeah,
and to correctly price nature,
yeah.
and so that nature can pay for itself.
Her
What,
restoration, yeah.
right, right. Well, my question is like, why do we need to do that? Why do we have to put a value on it?
Well, because if you don't put a value on it, right, this
Right,
is it, then who would pay for it? Basically, we if you would agree with me that it needs to be done,
right,
because we've
100%.
lost 75% of our wetlands worldwide. We've lost 85% of our seagrass. We've lost, forests. Slowly the forests are coming back. We've lost, the re-wetting of peatlands. I think there's 50% of all peatlands worldwide have gone. So, and
Right,
all of these are big carbon sinks or whatever. So, if you would agree that it needs to be done,
100%.
then I would challenge you back to say, right, so who pays for that then? And
Right.
the answer to that, we touched on it in terms of philanthropists and that side of it, and then government, is the other side of it, and then you're looking at the landowners probably, unless if
Right.
you legislate for landowners, right? So, so philanthropists, there's only a certain amount of money. The government have got, there's lots of other stuff that there's other governmental priorities,
Hmm.
but they can obviously lead and be catalysts for change through regulation and whatever else, and then there are companies who can then invest in it. But again, most of their money is in is the cost of production, and there's marketing, and we talked about ESG, but that's not the trillion, well, the hundreds of billions of dollars that needs to be spent annually to be able to do that. So it's a large quantum.
Right.
And so there's no other way really, a scalable way, other than and pricing nature, so people can therefore understand how then nature can pay for her own restoration, basically,
Right.
because ultimately it's a cost of doing business, and it needs to be priced into the supply chain, basically. And so, for instance, if I just gave you a housing. So housing in the UK, I don't know about other places, but other places would probably be similar, but certainly mostly in the northern hemisphere. But it produces between a household, average household, 2.5 people. Probably a kilo of 700 grams of nitrates and 700 grams of phosphates, right? So that is
Right.
just washing powders and everything else like that. So you multiply that by how many households there are, that's a
Right.
lot, right? Which water companies have to then treat. They can't treat it
Hmm.
all, and that goes into the rivers, and then et cetera, right? So
Right.
there is, so for every new house developed now, and this is just in the UK, and I don't know about the rest of the world, but there are
Sure.
now there's nutrient codes, right? So you have to offset, as a developer, you have to offset that amount. And so the nature is the best way. So either part of it is you can do it through local water cleaning, so local, or you can pay for nature to be able to do
Right.
that, to offset that in nature. So and that's, so then you can build your house, and so there is a negative effect of building another house, in
Hmm.
the UK.
Right.
So they pay roughly, for nitrate. So anywhere, they pay anywhere from 2 to 4K, 2,000
Right.
to 4,000 pounds to offset that. And that then goes to a landowner, or to us, who will then create a new media. So and again, the best way of offsetting nitrates and phosphates in this sense is wetlands, which would include salt marshes, and that
Hmm.
money then is paid for by the developers. So it's priced
Right.
into the cost of the house. And so nature is paying for herself, because you have determined at the moment that's what the market rate is. But if there is no nitrate or nutrient code at the moment, but when there will be, then you can start trading these vehicles, and then
Right.
there's a chance to do more and restore it, not just restore and maintain and do that side of things. So that's basically what we're talking about here. So we need a zero sum game, basically, in developing and continuing to develop as the world, because we are 8 billion people. Fertilizers are here to stay, because the planet could only feed 4 billion, and so the
Hmm.
only way that we feed 8 billion people is through fertilizers. And
Right.
they're the main emitters of nitrates and phosphates, and that's the stuff that is messing up our water, because it's feeding us.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's yeah.
No, no, I get that. So maybe we can get into some of the practical solutions
Sure.
that you put in place, and that will help to give
Sure.
a more concrete picture of the work you're
Of
doing.
what we do.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we could start with the landfill work, or would you like to start
Yeah,
with
sure, we
salt
can do
marsh?
that. Yeah. So at the moment, there's a lot of money, a lot of investors, so venture capitalists or whatever else, looking to invest,
Right.
in nature.
Right.
Most of that money at the moment is going into deep tech, and
Right.
carbon solutions, basically, because there is carbon codes around. There's
Right.
peatland codes, and so there's voluntary carbon systems, and so people feel comfortable to go into that, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there's also now, and then again in the UK. So I can just again, I don't know where elsewhere, but there's a thing
That's
called
fine.
biodiversity net gain. So this is
Right.
another tax levied on house builders, which says basically if you dig up a field, which is worth say 10 points of biodiversity. So there's everything from birds to to grass to scrub to to spiders to whatever else. There's a biodiversity value to that thing. So 10 points, you've got to go and create 11 points, so 10% more elsewhere. So you have to go and improve, so you have to go and instead of to maybe dig up another field and put woodlands or wetlands or wildflower meadows on it, which supports a much deeper biodiverse habitat, basically.
Right.
So that's another one, and so now basically, what we do is to figure out, how do we deliver enhanced habitats on landfills. So that's, and therefore local authorities are really anxious to create more biodiversity net gain. So
Right.
and then and so closed landfill sites is just a brilliant way to do it, because they cannot, and this is the other thing, they cannot. What we try and do is to work with land which cannot be built on and cannot be farmed for more than 100 days, because again, food security is a real issue
Right.
in the world. And so it needs to be produced sustainably. And so closed landfill sites are a great way of doing it. The so planning is the reason we use
Right.
enhanced habitats is planning gain is basically why we do it. For the closed closed landfills, we earn most of our money actually through a circular economy model, which basically
Right.
says in order to build a house, you got to create some foundations. There's roughly 70 meters cubed for every house built, and
Okay.
that needs to be put somewhere. And then,
Right.
and so we then charge the developers, or they give it to hauliers. We talk to hauliers, and we charge them to put that earth somewhere. And so we can reshape and recreate new landfill sites, which where often they've been poorly capped in the 60s, 70s, and so it is clay, and then we just create a thing where trees typically can grow as well as wetlands and whatever else, because often on a lot of closed landfill sites in the UK, again,
Mhm.
you see a lot of plastic poles, which is where one time a tree was, but they've grown for a
Right.
while, but their roots have hit the cap and died because they haven't
So,
been properly restored.
right. And so what is that? I don't quite understand why that is. It's not been done in a particular way
Yeah,
previously?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, no, it's been they've been it's now done well, right? So
Right.
there's so
Yeah.
the but probably that's it's been done well probably for the last 25, 30 years.
Right.
So this so the so old landfill sites can't leach. So with all the
Right.
nasties, the rain comes in, goes out, and it needs to go somewhere.
Right.
But now, but so what needs to be done for the previous ones is that it needs to be properly capped and properly done. And so the guys who were earning business with the landfill site owners, they just
Mhm.
wanted to put rubbish in there and do the minimum amount, finish it, cap it, put grass on it, and leave, because that's
Right.
the least expensive way of doing it. That's
Right.
just it was an expense then, because
Yeah.
nature, you can't make money out of nature. Now you
Right.
can.
Right.
And so now there's a new circular economy model which can work, and you can deliver this, which offers an environmental benefit as well as practical benefit. And what we
Okay.
also do on the landfills, just so you know, is
Yeah.
that instead of tankering away, lots of people, because as the landfill sinks, because it
Yep.
rots,
Right.
whatever else, stuff comes out, and actually, and it gets tankered away, the leachate.
Right.
So now, and to be treated and whatever else, but now actually nature can do that too, which
Right.
is amazing. So you can create wetlands on landfill sites to save all the carbon, to treat the leachate, and then we put the water that is being treated and cleaned through the wetlands back onto the closed landfill, which have got new trees and wetlands and whatever else to water and to keep it healthy. So it's
Okay.
it's a beautiful circular economy.
So okay, so that's an excellent example of the practical work that you're doing. But again, just to maybe understand clearly the circular economy, because I think a lot of people won't understand
Yeah,
a lot about this kind of
yeah,
practical thing that's taking place in
yeah,
our economies. For every house that's being built, they have to dig big holes to
Yeah.
create the foundations, right? For every
Yeah.
house, every building. And with that, that produces a whole bunch of soil that they need to put somewhere.
Yeah.
And effectively, what you're saying is you then take that soil away for them,
Yeah.
and they're paying you to take that soil away. Is that
We
correct?
don't. We just accept it. The hauliers do. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
They get charged by the lorry. The hauliers, pay charge the developers to pay, to take the muck away, and part
Right.
of that we then charge the hauliers to put the muck on our landfill sites.
Right. Okay. And so you're getting some money once the you get paid once the soil lands in your landfill site, which is that cost has been passed on to the developer of that
Yeah.
house,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're then landscaping and looking after these closed sites so that they don't have a negative impact on the
Leaching
the
on the environment.
environment. And then I didn't quite understand. So then carbon credits and nature credits come
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
into it as
exactly.
well.
That's the last bit,
Right,
because the last bit is that everything has a value in nature.
right,
That's
right.
the other brilliant thing is
Yeah,
how much, how many bugs and bees and birds and everything else, and then how much, and how many nutrients it absorbs and everything else. So how much is it helping us keep the planet level or keep the stasis of the
yeah,
planet? And so biodiversity change, that sort of things. And so, an old oakland, an old oak wood, an
right,
ancient woodland is probably worth the most, together with actually salt marshes, because in terms
right,
of the biodiversity and everything but the oaklands, they take hundreds of years to establish,
right.
and so that
Sure.
takes a while. So there is a timeline. So it's what you do versus the time in which you can create it. And so sometimes, it's almost better to plant brambles because they
Right.
come up, and they have dormice, and they have all sorts of different things. And so there's different benefits. But yeah, so that's really what this biodiversity net gain metric does. It values
Yeah.
what flora and fauna and whatever else produces or gives back to the planet, is really what it is. It's brilliant.
Right. No, it's fascinating because you're now incentivized to play a game of rehabilitation,
Yeah,
regeneration
exactly, exactly.
of the land, and to find the best ways to create the most biodiversity. And so
Yeah,
that's really fascinating. But I do have a question. Who then are you selling the credits to?
yeah, to house builders.
Oh, so and that closes the
Usually
circle.
circular. Yeah, 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 because they need to have the credits in order to build the
Right.
house.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So that so the price, yeah.
It's fascinating. I love this. This
Yeah.
is really exciting. And what I
And
really love
just
about it, sorry,
yeah.
sorry, Tom,
Just
go
to go
ahead.
back and just to say, sorry, I said most of the I didn't finish that thought. The most of the money that's goes into carbon and to deep tech and that side of things. So
Right,
people are looking for, and we call ours nature-based solutions. That's the sort of
right.
the holistic term of
Yep.
this. And there's not a lot of profitable nature-based solution companies out there for investors to invest in,
Right.
because
Exactly.
there still needs to be more research, and there still needs to be more proof, and investors are clever people, right? They need a
Right.
return,
Yeah.
and they're not
Exactly.
philanthropists. Well, they may be in their spare time, but in their business hours, they're looking for return. And
Yeah.
so the landfill thing, the reason the landfill thing is good, and we're putting spoil onto, not into, because there's landfill tax and whatever, so we're not subject to that. That's what's so important, because this is a 20% IRR, so it's a decent return for a
Right.
nature-based solution, and that's the exciting thing, and that's why we've now found the sweet spot of talking to investors, because there's always there's a reticence to do that, and there are, like everybody, there are pioneer investors, but there's no mugs out there, and so you
Right.
have to
No.
offer something which delivers return, and with nature, you cannot hurry her, and that's good news and bad news, right?
Right.
It takes a while to do it, but once you've ruined stuff, it takes a while to repair it,
Right.
and then there's all sorts of regulatory stuff you have to wade through,
Right.
which again is, good news and bad news. The bad news is it takes you 2-3 years to get going on something. The good news is that there's a lot of people looking after our natural assets of the country, and so
Yep.
they can't be destroyed by less scrupulous people. So
Yeah.
it's a balance.
Yeah, no, I love it. Not only because as you mentioned, it's a nature-based solution that is profitable, but the other part I really love about it is, often we see a lot of these new solutions are about um, changing something or changing the system or completely doing something in a new way. What I love about your solution is it's really down in the basic fundamentals of how our society works and solving problems there.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't look there to find the
Yeah.
solution.
Well,
So
our pipeline is about new solutions.
right,
So our pipeline is, if our pipeline, so salt marsh and seagrass, and that's a sort of the symbiosis of earth change with land and water. Land and water has made a lot of very clever people who basically invent new machinery as well as
right,
by way of competitive advantage to
right,
deliver to enhance nature at scale, right? And so the first one is salt marsh.
yeah.
And for
Let's get into
years,
that.
so the big dredges, the salt marsh, the dredging industry is basically owned by the Dutch, unsurprisingly, since
Right.
most of their country is below sea level,
Yep.
and they are incredible, but it's figuring out. But basically the way, so in the UK alone, there's between 20 and 30 million tons of sediment that is dredged and dumped at sea every year, right?
Wow.
Every year to keep our ports open. So trade. And for the
Right.
UK, 80% of our goods come through our ports. We're an island. And so
Wow.
that's really, really important.
Right.
But and they need to be maintained, and actually as tankers and everything else become bigger, and they need to be further dredged and whatever. And so there's high nutrients to all, there's sediment which is taken and somewhere between 5 and 30 miles dredged and just dumped at sea.
Right.
um, this can't go on.
Yep.
But there needs to be some sort of sense and in terms of a process to say how we can change it. We're going to lose, sea level rises in the UK, at least in the south and east coast, will be up by a meter by 2100, in which
Right.
there's square kilometers, thousands of kilometers lost,
Right.
and but one of the ways to compensate for that is to take that sediment, and rather than taking it out to sea, is to put it back onto the land close by to where the ports are, to
Right.
create salt marshes, which are part of the flood defense. I mean, they attenuate waves, so it's not like it's not a commute moment, but it's you can actually stop. You can stop the power of the waves or whatever, because they do have that, but they need to be continually maintained because of sea level rise.
Right.
And so, but there is that, we have that sediment. And so what those clever people at Land and Water have done is they've invented this salt marsh restoration drag box, because ordinarily the sediment is sucked up from the bottom and spat out, right? And that's
Right.
roughly 10% sediment, 90% water.
Right.
And that's you can't make anything out of that. And so, but what we've done is to create, so that'll happen. So we can say you can put that stuff, in a the Dutch call it a depot, and then which is a place just off sea, and then this drag boxes has the ability to drag up this sediment up to 400 meters onto the shore and to
Wow. Okay.
recreate salt marsh. The salt marsh is basically created by taking things to just above median high water, right?
Right.
And then salt marsh then self-pollinates, so you don't need to plant it, whatever. You just need to be able to keep it out of the water for a certain amount of time. Plants
Right.
come along. So that's a big. Over the next 10 years, we're determined to change the whole concept of dredging,
Right.
and to say, look, let's leave it on the land rather than taking it out to sea. So, and that's a big thing, right? So that's huge. But it's just figuring out what can be done and what can't be done with that. And so that's how innovation. So it's changing a little bit what it is. I mean, rather than having it it piped piped onto thing. And the other, the other way in which salt marshes are made is, there's managed realignment, and so sea defenses are knocked down and the sea just comes in, right?
Right.
And the other one is, instead of, you can just, for islands, you can create islands just by
Right.
blasting, so spraying that, all the sediment onto that, and that's another way of doing it. But if you're trying to preserve your country, your island, our little island, this is not a bad way of doing it.
Right.
But it requires, massive change and a mindset change, but we need to think very carefully about how we do that, basically.
So I do want to get onto some of the R&D work that you're doing, and the codes, but just on the salt marshes, the salt marshes are, maybe just to give a little bit more context on the importance of the salt marsh as a habitat. It's such a big part of the coastal environment in the UK, isn't it? Well, it has been traditionally, but it's been disappearing at a massive pace, hasn't it?
And so I've talked about its natural sort of the horsepower of salt marshes in terms of its nitrate and phosphate absorption. The best,
right.
28 square meters is a kilogram of nitrates absorbed. About 10 times that is a kilogram of phosphates absorbed, and carbon is roughly 14 tons per hectare. So it's anywhere between 4 and 40, basically, depending where you are in the UK. So it's that side of things. And I've also talked about, its flood defense capacity, or its role that it plays in there. It's not a panacea by any shape or form.
Sure.
But, in terms of biodiversity, I mean, 60%, or I think it's 65% of fish, all fish, spend a part of their life in wetlands or salt marshes. Right. Whether they're born there, whether they grow up there, or whatever it happens to be. I mean, it's crazy. And there are thousands of different species that hang out. So it's incredibly biodiverse. Then the other side of it, so that's the swimmers, and then there's there's clever spiders, all sorts of different people, and apparently the best tasting lamb is brought up on salt marshes.
Salt marsh.
And so that is, but then there's nesting birds, and so there is the water, and again, so there's a lot of birds that need that feed off salt marshes and mudflats, and then ground nesting birds is away from foxes and all those nasty things as well. That's the foxes don't like getting wet so much, and so they support a lot of that side of biodiversity as well. So there's just it's just a bonkers, a bonkers rich, there's a huge support to nature, and that's basically what salt marshes are.
Yeah, and so then, like, I'm sort of drawing a link back to the landfills and your circular economy model. Is what you're trying to work on, besides just reestablishing the salt marshes, you're working on trying to identify, measure, and assign value to the reestablishment, so that you can then create a circular economy around the salt marshes.
So that's what I'm saying. So if you go back to this 28, so if the maths is, if it is 28 square meters, and we can corroborate that, there's a bit of research which says that, and so if you multiply that up, that's roughly 350 kilograms of nitrate absorption alone, right? And we know that nitrates get sold for somewhere between $2 and $4 grand a kilogram.
Right.
That's just nitrates.
Right.
So that's whatever is £500,000-700,000 for a salt marsh, for a salt marsh, a hectare of salt marshes, and so that's the value, and it's plain to see, but it just needs to be ratified. There's we're like, again, like the venture capitalists, the traders, the city the city fund managers, they like to know that everything is monitored, reported, and verified. If they're going to, again, put their money in it for any length of time, because it's yours or my pension or whatever it happens, whatever money that they're managing. And so in order to be bulletproof, it needs to have the right amount of due diligence on it, and research, and that's the scientists. but that's happening. So in 2 or 3 years' time, people will have got to a place where they're happy enough to say to stand on the evidence of the research that they've got to say that, yeah, actually it's this.
Right.
And then that allows, and then then it'll get monitored and reported, and and whatever else. And so you can only do what you can do, right? But you've got maintenance schedules and whatever else put in place, and that's basically what is required to get large money into the restoration of nature.
Right. Exactly. And that, I guess, maybe segues a bit into your R&D work, and it seems like a lot of that would be around. You use the word codes to describe, for instance, the carbon code, the biodiversity code, and maybe the nutrient code. And so you're working to try to create these codes or influence these codes, or
working with people, right? So there's
yeah.
different things. So there's people far cleverer than we are. So there's the universities we work with, and there's lots of other universities in the UK, but the ones that we do is Bangor University, and then there's an organization called the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which is basically when the government want to know what's right and what's wrong, they will go to them. And they're the guys who write the codes because they do research. They then they validate it, they report it, they validate it, and then the government trusts them basically because they are completely agnostic. They're just worried about the right answer or the truth. And so all we can do as as a business is to figure out is to speed that along, and speeding that along is doing stuff, because there's a lot of people pontificating and doing that side of things, but you just got to do stuff in order to measure it, because no doing, no measure, no product, no measuring. And so that's very much our role. And so if we can open up the market, then for us it's then other people will come in for sure, but it's a big old marketplace, and we like to think that we can compete with whomever, and if we're leading the market, then we can go to investors to say, hey, look, we understand what's going on, this is what we've done, this is what we're doing, and this is why you should invest further in us and in nature, or in nature through us. And that's probably the best way of saying it. We're just a humble sort of conduit to figure out how we preserve the planet.
Yeah. Okay. So let's transition into some of the challenges you've had. You spent a lot of your career in the private sector, albeit working in with community and trying to build community. This sector is very different. It's very political. How has your experience been in this sector? What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome? How have you felt about your experience in this sector to date?
So I mean, any change is difficult, right? So there's always the pioneer, and I mean, social change is tough too. But there's more of the secret sauce is known, and that's and then they're just dealing people, the good, the bad, the ugly. But generally, you can change or make a difference in most people's lives. With environmental change and purpose through that, there is the other. So you're still dealing with people, who are guardians of land and landowners and planners and permitters like the Environment Agency. But you're dealing with Mother Nature, and there's seasons, and there's floods, and there's droughts, and there's all the other different bits and pieces, and so things just take a bit longer. It's just, and that's probably the most tedious thing. You can't be in a rush. You cannot be a hasty person. You have to have a vision. You have to have the people. I mean, more than ever, the trust me side of thing. And so I think the people like me, and I spent 30 years in sports marketing before I got to the environment. People like me wouldn't have been able to make a business, even, I don't know, definitely 10 years ago, but maybe even 5 years ago, because there's not this incredible urge just to change and for people to try. Because people don't like the guardians of land and different things, whether that's the government or whether it is landowner or whatever else, are cautious people. We talk to farmers, they're the most cautious, and they think generationally, and that's the most amazing thing about farmers. They think generationally, they think in the long term, and it's amazing people. So that, not a hasty business. That is it's the most amazing business, right? Because it's really worth it, but it's
Right.
you can't in this business. They always say Rome wasn't built in a day. My goodness, no, North nature.
Yeah, but nature's also interesting, right? In that nothing can happen for a long time, and you can be working towards something, and nothing can happen, and then you hit like an exponential curve,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
where
There is a
nature
whole.
starts really
Yeah,
taking, like it hits critical mass or something like
yeah,
that, and
yeah,
explodes.
yeah.
Um, so it's an interesting space.
It's a
But
hockey stick.
given
Nature is
right, exactly,
completely the hockey stick model is definitely nature. I
right,
mean, like everything, and in a good way and in a bad way. There's
right,
both ways. Stuff works, or if stuff is a calamitous, and let's not
right.
talk about the the bad
Right. And
calamitous
so
stuff.
then getting feedback and trying to iterate is a challenge. But I guess another part of the challenge to growing an enterprise or a company in that kind of space is when you have a long period of not a lot of progress and you're waiting for the curve to change, you've got to
Well, yeah,
sustain your organization
yeah,
at that time.
exactly. It's
So
cashing.
funding
Yeah,
becomes a challenge, right?
yeah. And for us, and we funded our business through shareholder, not loans, just through shareholder contributions. So it is
Right.
equity in a sense.
Right.
And that's now, it's taken us 3 years to get to a point where we're now looking for money for further investment because we've
Right.
proven pretty well everything,
Right.
and we're off and we're in planning and we're these different things. But still, even if you're in planning, that can be 2 years away. And so, but you've got to have got to that before, because
Right.
most investors, they're on a 5-year cycle,
Yeah.
7, max 10,
Yeah.
because these funds, they go out and make money and say, hey, look, we'll give you a return in this amount of time. And most, not all funds are close-ended, but there's that's just the nature of investment and managing
Yeah.
money, right?
Sure.
Fund management. um so
Right.
i so that's why, yeah. So yeah. So unless you're really supported by somebody with who's bought into your 5-year plan, then it's
It's a
really
challenge.
not. It's
Yeah.
difficult. Well, in the bit of nature that we're working in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So looking forward now, um, how do you think about your impact going forward? And are you going to be focusing on just these two areas, or do you think about trying to scale those two, or are you looking beyond that? And
Well,
what's the
it's these.
future for Earth Change?
Yeah. So it's with these two areas, and then there's other thing I mentioned, seagrass very briefly as well. We've
Right.
created we've automated the planting of seagrass. So
I
rather than
saw
just have
that.
divers, I mean, closer to the equator and wherever else. So seagrass grows, you just plop it over the boat, and because there's enough sun that can get down, then seagrass. Here you actually have to plant it
Right.
in Northern Europe, basically, and
Right.
then probably the more northern parts of the US, and where anyway, whatever, above a certain latitude. I
Hmm.
mean latitude. Yeah. So there's that, and then there's how do we help automate perhaps the process of planting kelp or see whatever. So there's lots of other stuff, but right now we're looking at basically how do we do see our main focus are closed landfills, just just around what we're raising money for, but
Right.
then pretty shortly thereafter, because it's probably 2 years away, is to say, hey,
Hmm.
look, salt marshes, we're ready to go, and we're working with the Crown Estate again in the UK. The Crown Estate owns most of the land below high tide,
Right.
because someone a long time ago was very smart.
Right.
um, but so there's lots of those would be the two areas we're focused, and some seagrass, but that would be the next 3 years. But that
Right.
we'll always look to develop. You can never stay still, but
Sure.
you have, but by the same token, you have to focus on what
Right.
you've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how about the markets? How are they evolving in terms of like you got the carbon market that's I don't know if I could use the word mature now, but it's been around for some time and it's had its ups and downs. I believe biodiversity is starting to evolve.
Yeah.
Is it a case that the markets one day they've turned on and they now exist, or do they sort of evolve into place?
Well,
And
yes.
then Yeah, and then the third thing was the nutrient market. How are we close to having those established, those
Yeah.
markets?
So the carbon market uh, is established and is growing. I mean, so there
Right,
are voluntary markets all over the world, and then there is in Europe. There's actually a legitimate carbon market, which is mainly based. It's a European carbon market where the
right,
the concrete and the waste guys and whatever else can actually trade different credits to be able to stay in business, and
right.
that's pretty fixed in that. But so the carbon is definitely the most developed
Yeah.
because that is global warming, and that's where that is. In terms of other markets, so in the UK again, biodiversity net gain is now, is a market which is in law, it's an act, and so that's
Right,
now, and that started on the 12th of February this
right,
year, and so that is now it's racing ahead.
right,
Um, the nutrient markets and each of the, so it's not an overall nutrient market for all different people, but it's because that's the other thing about nature. She's the difference. So what is what how peatland reacts, how woodland reacts, how salt marshes react, how other wetlands, riparian wetlands. Each of
right,
them needs a different code because each of them are different and they produce different results. And so that's why there's lots of different things. So, for instance, in salt marshes, there's a salt marsh carbon code that's being written,
hmm,
and it will probably be out in next year. So it's been written by
right,
CEH, backed by DEFRA, and DEFRA is one of the governing bodies, is Department of the Environment, Farming, and Food and Agriculture, and so
right,
they're the guys that basically need to sign this off because it has to be backed by the government, etc., etc. And then, as part of that, next year we'll start. There's work being done on the salt marsh and nutrient code, and so that is but that is particular to salt marshes. That's
right,
it. Because the salt marshes are the salt marshes, and riparian wetlands, although they're both wetlands, they react in a different way, and woodlands
right,
do a different. Okay, but there are informal markets. There's always informal markets because
right,
at the moment there are houses being built and offsets that need to happen, and so there's research being done, and most of that's being done around rivers and how you can create riparian wetlands to offset that. So there is informal, but big markets signed off by government. That's the sort of thing. It's probably a 3 to 5 year process
right.
basically, because it's assembling sufficient amount of research to be enabled for the scientists to say to government, hand on heart, you can do it. This is
Yeah.
what they do, and that's the key.
No, I get it. I can see that now. And so, looking forward again, imagine these markets are turned on. Your role becomes you're one of the leaders in the salt marsh
Yeah,
market, and so
yeah,
you have a competitive advantage there. And then also it becomes a not a competition, but there's an incentive to be able to build back salt marshes at a competitive price, I guess. Like the different people
yeah.
will start getting into those markets. And is that how it would evolve in the future?
Yeah.
Once as the market matures, you're then sort of might be competing with others to sort of say,
Yeah.
I can offer
And there's
this
different, yeah,
at a
exactly. And there's different ways
right.
of creating, as I said, different ways of creating salt marshes. All we're saying
Yeah,
is
right,
we do it through a circular economy model, which takes sediment and recreate salt marsh that way, right?
right,
And so there's roughly 22,000 hectares of salt marshes to be restored, in the UK, and that's from WWT, which is the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust.
right,
And just as and probably 20,000 of that is through managed realignment. So it's basically
right,
giving back to the sea the land that we've taken over the millennia.
right.
But the big issue with that is a lot of that area is Norfolk and Suffolk, and they
Right,
produce huge amounts of our food, and
right,
so that's a big deal. Um, so what we're doing as well. So as well as being circular, we're
hmm,
also creating land or creating salt marshes and land that wouldn't has no agricultural or food
right,
benefit,
right,
basically, or food for us
right.
for
Yeah.
other folk, it's vital.
Okay.
So that's how we would compete, and we'd probably say that we were, the salt marshes we create are probably a better salt marsh, only insofar as there's so many benefits to it and very few negatives.
Right.
They can
Okay.
be
So
maintained.
one last question about the risks going forward. Is there a risk that, with these kind of markets developing and needing approval with government, that say in 5 years' time there's a new market, like let's say um, kelp forests, and
Yeah,
the rates of sequestration and nutrient things are much better, and so
yeah.
then everyone sort of rushes to that, and the market falls out of the bottom of. Is there that kind of a risk, or is there
Yeah.
enough market for all the habitats?
Well, there is, because because I mean, all these different, there's all these different uh, bits of land. So we've lost between 60 and 80% of all these different
Right.
habitats, and so therefore they all need to be restored. And they are, and actually it's producing them and keeping them. Saltmarsh's biggest challenge is keeping it in
Keeping
some
it.
way, shape, or form, because
Right.
we know it's better than pretty well everything else, but with sea level rise it needs to maintain, and so it's the cost of maintenance which will be the most difficult part.
Right.
There's always, and if we can create new markets as well, then all the better. But
Right.
I mean, people are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year to recreate habitat to maintain biodiversity here. So there's lots of room for everybody here, lots. And I think
No,
that
I
would,
see that.
maybe in 20 years or 30 years, that's it. But it's that all the stuff is all priced in and hardwired in. So everybody who's invested in it their investment is safe.
Right.
We may have had to change our business model and go after
Sure.
different environment, but investors, the money is fine because most of it is
Yeah.
all upfront.
No, I can see that.
The return, that
Yeah.
is.
No, this is really exciting. The work that you're working on, I find it fascinating. I apologize if some of my questions were a little bit
Yeah.
silly. I'm trying to just get up the learning curve and really clearly understand these markets and how they're evolving and how these solutions are coming together. Tom, I'm very conscious of time, and so maybe just sort of wrapping things up. A lot of my aim with this podcast is to help inspire the future entrepreneurs and those who want to get involved in this space. And so I wanted to ask you, if you, as an entrepreneur, a founder, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs out there who want to get into trying to do something to save the world?
Yeah. So you've got to know what particular part of the world you want to save, and then you've got to figure out again, what is the route to money on this, because as I've said, it is a 3 to 5 year process. And
Right.
the first business I have, most people in starting up a business, when you start, it takes you 2 years to break even. It does.
Right.
It was almost, my first business it took me to the day. It was, we had a positive cash flow after 2 years.
Right.
But the environment is 3 to 5.
Yeah.
That's on our bit. That's in our bit. So you should go into it with your eyes wide open in that way. The
Yeah.
next thing is to say that a lot of nature is, you've got to figure out what the government regulation is behind it and what
Right.
is in place and what isn't in place, because unless it's in place or very close, again, it's really difficult to back yourself, especially if if it's your own cash, or to begin with, or it's other
Yeah.
investors' cash. No, have a very realistic time to say when actually your ideas can scale and do that. The market at the moment is, and at the moment, if you're looking to go into nature as an entrepreneur, tech and deep tech is really where to go, and part of it is the
Yeah.
measuring side of things, and
Yeah.
then there's a lot of people I talk to in the environment that says, look, tech ain't going to save or restore nature. Nature needs to be restored, but that's maybe for the more patient and inside of it. So in terms of being really useful,
Right.
but so that's just in terms of what I see out there in the marketplace, that's the best thing. Well, that's what I would advise anyway.
No, excellent. That's great advice. So, Tom, if people wanted to get in touch with you or to follow your work with Earth Change, how can they best do that?
Yeah, so I'm Tom at earthchange.co.uk, but and most of the stuff I post actually is on LinkedIn.
Right. Yeah.
Just in terms of that's probably where I'm most active.
Great.
So I'm more than happy to send you my LinkedIn. Was it tag? I don't know, or address.
Your link, your address. Yeah, I'll put all those details
Okay,
in
fine.
the
So those
comments
are the
below.
best, and
Great.
and I'm more than happy to answer any questions or whatever.
Great. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today on the light side of green. It's been an exciting discussion, and I really love the project that you're working on.
Great. Thanks, Anton.